Hello, Watem here and welcome back to small Higurashi When They Cry. There was a small update to this chapter for some reason on Steam, which then broke the mod version so the game wouldn't start. So that's why there's been a delay. So I had to reinstall the game, then I had to reinstall the mod. But yeah, in any case, let's continue with Kyosuke Irei. Group physical exams are very meaningful for our research. Although it's only for certain age groups, we can examine many of the Hinazawa residents at the same time. It's a perfect cover for our research center. Also, because of several arrangements, we have a monopoly on the villagers' corpses. Yay! What do you have? We have a monopoly on sugar and salt, and we have a monopoly on corpses. Yeah, no, and we can perform autopsies on them too. Huh. There certainly wasn't an environment this rich in opportunity for those in the medical field. Our follow-up work on the late Dr. Takano is going smoothly. The amount of data he compiled is absolutely astounding. He truly was an incredible researcher.
失礼します、所長。
ああ、高野さん。お疲れ様です。
先ほど東京から残りの検査結果が郵送されてきました。こちらに置きますわね。
ありがとうございます。いよいよ面白くなってきましたね。
Ah, that was there before you. I'm not sure if you can see it in a recording, but it has the art style. There.
この面白さを共有できてとても嬉しいですわ。
Takano-san is my assistant, who was sent from the self-defense force. But she's far from the image I have of an SDF officer. Just like our research is being concealed, maybe her identity is concealed too. I'm sure her name is an alias as well. I'm just a doctor and a researcher. Without Takano-san's support, it would be impossible for me to manage this institution. She's a pipeline to her clients in Tokyo, my assistant, as well as a researcher who's an expert on Hinazawa syndrome. Her existence is absolutely necessary here. The more I think about it, the more I feel that this should have been the Takano Institute rather than the Irei Institute, and she should be the director. That was explained to me when they asked me to take this position. My client wanted a civilian to manage his place. Yeah! Oh. They searched for a person who met their requirements, and there I was. I became the director. I have a feeling I'm just a puppet on their strings. But I won't just sit here and do nothing. I was asked to research a rare disease. I'm a researcher. So of course, I'm excited about that. My client's goals might be different, but I'm here out of a desire to unravel the mysteries of Hinazawa syndrome and be the first person to uncover a new mystery for mankind.
ひなみざわ症候群という寄生虫感染症がほぼ間違いなく存在するという浮かし彫りの情報はいくらでも集まるのに、原因となる病原体が発見できないのはとても悔しいですね。
そうですわね。電子顕微鏡を使えばあっさりと見つかるだろうという期待も少しはしていたもので。
Viruses are too small to see with a regular microscope. So the invention of the electron microscope was a dramatic advancement in the world of medicine. However, it's very expensive, and there's no way for a normal doctor to acquire one. The late Dr. Takano said an electron microscope could find the cause of the disease, but it seems his theory has been proven wrong. Even Takano-san was hoping an electron microscope would find it. She was disappointed when she didn't uncover anything after all the autopsies she performed. Our research seems to be having its first snag. It has actually stalled our work for several weeks now. Well, so we need to think about where to go from here.
となると、 極小の極小なのか、あるいは検体そのものに問題があるのかもしれません。
と申しますと？
例えばですが、野生のネズミの体に多数のノミが寄生していることはご存知と思います。
The host dies, they leave the body, maybe?
ですが、ネズミの死体を調べたところでノミを見つけることはできません。宿主が死んだ時点で寄生虫であるノミの生活基盤も崩壊するからです。
宿主が死ねば寄生虫にとってそれは地球が滅んでしまうのと同じことというわけですわね。
Even then, it's maybe like fleas compared to mice, it's not as big of a difference, but a microorganism on a human body, would it necessarily? Oh, yeah, there'd probably be dead cells left inside the body as well.
そうです。滅びた後の地球を調べても人類を見つけることができないのと同じです。
ということは、滅ぶ前の地球を調べればよいという話になりますわね。
そうですね。ただ、滅ぶ前の地球には人権があります。
Do we?
生きているうちに調べることは難しいでしょう。
One of the main difficulties in brain research, examining a living human's brain. No matter how you sugarcoated it, that bore a very grave meaning. From a medical standpoint, it's necessary. But you have rules and morals in this world. We have to advance medicine within such boundaries. There was a time when I was studying lobotomies for the betterment of mankind. I don't think I was wrong. However, could I ever be forgiven under our ideas of ethics? I don't know. One day, my judgment will be handed down by the devil. Whether I'm guilty or not, I have to accept it. As I reflected upon my past, I heard a voice. It was Sakano-san's. It was very clear and simple, yet it struck me with surprise.
わかりました。滅ぶ前の地球を用意させましょう。
え？
I startled. Sometimes the phrase advancing medicine bore the whisper of the devil, tempting us to accept sacrifices. I heard that devil's whisper.
そんなに難しいことではありませんわ。ひなみ沢の住民ですでに重篤の状態で市内病院に入院しており、いつ死んでもおかしくない患者を探させるだけですもの。
しかし、いくら余命いくばくとはいえ、自らの体を生きているうちに検体に差し出される勇気のある方がいらっしゃるでしょうか。
そんな必要はありませんわ。いずれ亡くなる方にほんの少し早くお休みいただくというだけの話ですわ。書類上ね。
Patient would be legally declared dead, even though they're still alive. Oh. And we perform an autopsy while they're still alive.
無理でしょう。
Oh. Impossible, no. Problematic, yes.
第一、頭蓋を切開するような大手術となれば、絶対に痕跡は残ります。遺体を遺族の方が見られたら不審に。
そういうところを何とかできるのが私どもではありませんの。山犬に至急条件を満たす患者が存在しないか市内病院を調べさせます。
All you have to do is wait with a knife and a fork in your hands.
すぐに研究対象をお連れいたしますから。
わかりました。
Mio Takano-san is my partner. There's no question about that. But I just can't trust her. It's her extremities as a researcher which contrasts largely with mine. But are we so different? I'm here simply waiting with a knife and fork in my hands, just as she told me to. I just don't want to witness such a gruesome scene, that's all. What she's preparing for me now is exactly what I want. Who's the hypocrite? Not her. It's me. How can I say I'm different, knowing what I've done in the past? I performed lobotomies without the patient's consent, despite it being a surgery that might affect their life forever. How is that different from what she's doing? I have never doubted my past achievements. However, when I look at her, I start to feel unease. Takano-san is talking to Okanogi over the intercom in my office. I'm sure she's telling him to come over so she can explain to him what was just discussed. I'm simply watching without stopping her. I begin to reflect upon my past, to remember why I chose to become a doctor. I wanted to become a doctor ever since I was little. Doctors make a lot of money. People look up to doctors. I think those are the kind of reasons I had. So when I played with my friends, I always acted like a doctor. I cleaned their wounds and applied ice packs when my friends sprained their ankles, using what I'd learned from household medical books. Everyone, including me, believed that I'd be a doctor one day. But not the doctor. Anyway, my family was poor, so they praised me for that goal. They told me that I needed to study a lot to become a doctor, so they borrowed some pseudo-medical books from the local library for me. The rental fees weren't cheap, so I'd speed read one book in a day, and the next. My parents would go back to the store to exchange it for a different book, saying they accidentally borrowed a book they already borrowed before. By doing so, my parents borrowed 2 books for the price of one. Of course, now I know those books were rather useless, but they were highly motivational just the same. My neighbours called me Dr. Kyosuke-kun, and I was always picked the class health officer at school. Even my teachers helped me with the classes I needed to take to become a doctor. Of course, in reality, becoming a doctor isn't as easy as it might seem. I had to study diligently. The path was most definitely rough. To become a doctor, one must attend college. Since my family was poor, I was told I wasn't allowed to go to an expensive private school, so I had to be admitted to a national public university. My grades weren't bad, but the admission rate to national public universities is very marginal. Especially since I wanted to go to a medical school, my chances were even smaller. I studied like crazy. My only driving force was my childhood dream of becoming a doctor. The dream of becoming a doctor and to be looked up to by everyone kept me going. And I was admitted. I wasn't at the top of the list, but I made it in. I was finally at the starting point of making my childhood dream come true. My parents were thrilled. Neither my father nor mother went to college, so they were proud of their son getting to a public medical school. They invited our relatives over to celebrate. Although it was a public university, tuition wasn't cheap, but they still had an extravagant celebration anyway. My father didn't express his emotions much. He always kept a straight face. He rarely voiced his opinion or took initiative on anything. My mother took care of everything, and he showed up last and left without saying a word. He was his typical stern and silent Japanese father of the time. And so I was surprised to see him, shedding tears of joy, and I cried along with him. He went around to all my relatives while repeatedly slapping my back, saying how proud and lucky he was to have a son like me. He bragged about my achievements to all who would hear them. The celebration became my farewell party as I was about to leave for Tokyo. My father yelled "Banzai" repeatedly at the station as the train pulled away. I was a little embarrassed. When I could no longer see my father, I could clearly recall the tears pouring down. Aww. The days of hellish studying and exams began after that. Yep. Some days I was tempted to just give up and submit myself to the lavish lifestyle of the city. But the letters from my family always encouraged me and gave me the strength to go on. My dream then was to open up my own clinic in my hometown so I could contribute to the region. I never even dreamed of getting involved with brains. Brains. I was going to say, maybe then one day he became a zombie. Anyway, one day I noticed a difference in the letter from my family. The letter said the usual things about how it was at home and asked how I was doing. The postscript was what caught my attention. Your father has become really violent lately. Sometimes he turns the house upside down, and I don't know what to do. Just couldn't picture him acting viciously. I was extremely surprised. Did something happen? But in the postscript, my mother said there was nothing she could think of. My father and mother had been together for a long time, and I said that in the opposite order. They'd been together since well before I was born. So she noticed things that I couldn't. She couldn't even think of a reason why father had become so violent. What happened? They got along so well. They were such a lovely couple. When I caused a problem for my mother when I was little, my father only bonked my head with his knuckle. Well, that's the onset of minor traumatic brain injuries. Less of an issue when you're young, though, because you can actually repair when you're younger. Later on, as you get older, if you like sports, for example, even without getting a concussion and without any specific individual traumatic brain injury, if you keep having lots of very small, like minor traumatic brain injuries, then it can actually have similar effects as getting a concussion or multiple concussions. I remember it being described as like your main brain going to mush. So there's all these like micro lesions. Anyway, in your brain. I'll keep going. Why was he acting this way towards my mother? Maybe there was some kind of misunderstanding between them. I was going home for the New Year. Maybe I could have a good talk with him then. But the situation was a lot more serious than I thought. Oh. On one cold winter day, I found my apartment door unlocked. Thought someone had broken in, but I found my mother in my apartment with her luggage. That's right. My mother could no longer take my father's fury and came to stay with me. This was back when people still believed in the proverb, "Woman has no place to settle down all her life." She couldn't go back to her own family because they lived in the same region as my father, so she came all the way to Tokyo. I heard about my father's violence from my mother's own lips. She cried, saying she had no idea why such a quiet man changed like that. She said she wasn't ever going back to him. I didn't know what to do. I asked her if she could talk to him one more time, but the bruises on her body told me it was no use. Aww. To remember what happened afterwards is too much, so I'll be brief. After my mother left, my father thought she was having an affair and went over to the neighbour's house with a wooden sword. He was arrested. He was released immediately, but he assumed someone in the neighbourhood was hiding her, so he did the same thing repeatedly. He eventually reached the point of getting into fights with anyone he saw. In the end, he picked a fight with some young punks and ended up being beaten to death. My relatives gave my father a decent funeral, but my mother didn't attend. It's no use beating a dead horse, so nobody said anything negative about my father, but everyone was simply puzzled as to why he changed so much. Mood swings, perhaps? What I heard from my relatives about my father's final days was a lot stranger than what I heard from my mother. My mother only told me about his sudden rage and violence. My relatives told me he also laughed and grew sad. Apparently he's displayed several sudden fluctuations of emotion, especially so in his last years. He also told me that he started to complain about headaches after an accident he had. Okay, yep, that is definitely looking like a concussion, or probably more severe than just that, than typical concussion. Father was a construction worker, so yeah, it might also be that he's had, like, this one in particular started to trigger the effects, but he's already been hit before and walked it off without any major effects, well, major noticeable effects. I wonder if they mention slurring words. He had hit his head hard on a construction board during an accident at work. He regained his consciousness quickly and seemed fine. But since the accident, he started to have headaches, behave normally. I sensed the connection between the accident and my father's changes, so I talked to my professor after I went back to Tokyo.
断言はできませんが、その様子から入江君のお父さんに何らかの異常が起こっていた可能性は否めません。その事故の際に脳が傷つき、精神的な変化を起こしたのかもしれませんね。お父さんの晩年の言動からは、そんな患者さんに多く見られるいくつかの症状が伺えます。
Human behavior is created by the brain. And if the brain is damaged, it can cause erratic behavior. In other words, my father wasn't crazy. He was suffering from a disorder.
お父さんの遺体を検視できるなら、脳をよく調べてみるといいでしょう。ひょっとすると、腫瘍のようなものが見つかるかもしれません。
My father had already been cremated, so there was no way of knowing. But hearing about his behavior, I knew for sure. That was the only way to explain why such a quiet and gentle man would change. I tried to explain all this to my relatives to regain my father's honor, but hardly anyone understood. If his brain was damaged, he would have been dead. But he was alive and well. So the accident didn't damage his brain. It wasn't his brain that caused him to change, it was his mind. They simply brushed it off like that. This is a perception most people have about the brain. Really? Like, aggression is one of the most noticeable effects of brain injuries. And like a lot of other things get grouped into it as part of the reason, but also it's one of the more noticeable ones. Because it's outwards acting rather than inwards. And sometimes can be caused by like confusion and stuff. Like, for example, even if it's for language centers which are affected rather than what would normally cause like anger and all, you try to remember a word but keep struggling, and you know it's a word which you should know, but you just can't reach it, and so the confusion and anger at yourself can then lead to outwards, like outbursts as well. Anyway, most of the relatives didn't believe me, but there was one person I really wanted to anyway. That was my mother. As she got older, she grew senile, and she exaggerated the abuse she had to endure. All she did was criticize my father. And every time, she ended up crying, lamenting that she married him. They were a lovely couple. We were a great family. That's why I wanted to convey to her that she was misunderstanding the situation with my father. My father's behavior was caused by his brain damage. What he did to her was very sad, but he didn't want to be that way. I told her that he wasn't at fault. But my mother didn't understand. Before she took her last breaths, I begged her to forgive my father. But her final words were, "Please don't bury me next to that man." My father wasn't at fault. He was simply the victim of a brain disorder. You don't complain to a person who's coughing because he has a cold, because coughing is just a symptom, and he should be sympathized with. In my father's case, symptoms weren't as obvious as a cough. They took the form of changes in personality, which are much harder to recognize. If I had studied the brain more, I could have explained it better to my mother, so that she could have understood him. And they could have been a nice couple again in heaven. When I realized that, I cried. And I also realized that there are plenty of people like my father in this world who are suffering from a disorder, yet they are misunderstood and despised for it. And then I found out. I found about a miraculous cure for such disorders called a lobotomy. Not sure if that's actually all that useful for like traumatic brain injuries like that. If anything, most of the damage is already to the corpus callosum anyway, because it's like the two hemispheres of your brain kind of have a shearing force typically when you get hit in the head. Like they accelerate at different rates, and so it pulls at your corpus callosum, which is the part of the brain which connects the two hemispheres. And lobotomy cuts those, cuts through there to separate the two hemispheres. So I'm not sure about lobotomy actually being super useful there. Well, it does definitely have an effect. From memory, like one of the descriptions afterwards is not so much calm, but lack of aggression. Kind of more passive in a way. It's useful for like epilepsy and stuff, to prevent. Cause yeah, like there's been some studies which have shown it prevents it seizure from kind of traveling from one hemisphere to another, but also it seems to have the effect of actually lowering the effect within its own hemisphere as well. I will continue there. Ever since that day, I spent my days learning about the brain, so I could help people who were suffering from mental illness. My father is gone, but if he was still alive, I could cure him myself, so he and my mother could reconcile. That's the main reason why I'm here. Yeah, and I haven't really heard of lobotomies as treatment for brain injuries, but maybe it's just something I haven't heard of, and it is news. I guess let's go to Matake. The forecast said that there'd be a chance of rain in the evening, but I didn't think it would rain so hard. We decided to wait at an abandoned bus stop while the rain clouds cleared. Ooh. Wee. Wink wink. Abandoned bus stop in the rain. Anyway, I'm guessing that's with Takano-san.
ごめんよ、高野さん。
あら、いいのよ、気にしないで、次郎さん。私も土砂降りになるかもしれないことを覚悟の上で出かけたんだから。
Ooh, so you knew it would pour anyway. Wink wink. Takano-san giggled. Because she said the weather might change suddenly, I dragged her out here. Feel stupid for making her come along and ending up ruining her precious day off. I have to go back to Tokyo tonight, so it'll be a while before I can return to Hinamizawa. I didn't want to spend my last day at a cheap hotel in Okonomiya, so I asked her to go for a stroll.
いや、本当に申し訳ない。
She teased me for a while, but only a little. She wasn't actually enjoying driving me into a corner. That's just her way of communicating, and I find it very charming. No, I think I've become captivated by her. But on her part, I'm just an auditor from Tokyo. That's why she's being nice to me, and it's definitely not because she likes me personally. So I feel like I might have used my position to drag her out here. That makes me a little depressed. probably should think the slight fever I have is due to nothing more than a cold. Oh. Does he perhaps have Hinazawa syndrome? Also, I just thought of it. Takano saw Hanyu in the shrine. I mean, even when Satoko had her, got up to like one of the final stages, she could only hear Hanyu. She couldn't actually see Hanyu. So does Takano have Hinazawa syndrome? Though by the same token, Takano later on, when they talk about the when they're in the ritual implement storehouse thing, Tomitake hears for jumping, and Shion hears for jumping, but I don't think Takano hears it, so maybe she doesn't. She was the type of person who made it clear when she disliked something. She wouldn't say so directly, but she would use all kinds of indirect expressions that meant the same thing. So I want to believe that she's out here because she might even be a little bit attracted to me. Shook my head as I frowned upon my selfish thoughts. She chuckled as though she knew what I was thinking. Felt myself starting to go red after that.
二郎さんも不思議な人ね。東京ではさぞや女性にモテるでしょうに。なぜわざわざ私みたいなおかしな女に付き合ってくださるのかしら。
おかしななんてことはないよ。高野さんは十分魅力的だよ。むしろ僕みたいな男のために貴重な休日を割いてもらったのが申し訳ないくらいだよ。
いや
確かに私はとても大切な研究のために生涯を捧げたつもりだけど、それだけじゃ人生は潤いがないもの。たまには頭を切り替えて遊ぶことも大事だし、それに異性とのコミュニケーションは脳の活性にもとてもいいんだから。
Wink wink, abandoned bus stop in the rain. Hint hint. Anyway,
僕ごときで高野さんの頭の気分転換のお役に立ててるならいいんだけどね。
あなたは私と一緒にいても気分転換にはならない？
She gives me an impish smile that makes my heart skip a beat. I tried hiding my embarrassment so she wouldn't notice even my ears going red.
そんなことないよ。僕も高野さんと一緒に過ごせるといろいろと気分転換になるよ。それにほら、高野さんに野鳥撮影のことを布教すれば僕も撮影の同志を得られるわけだしね。
That sounds so forced.
もしよかったら次に来るときは僕の古いカメラを持ってくれよ。買うと高いからね。
Second-hand embarrassment hurts.
ありがとう。あなたを虜にする野鳥撮影がどれくらい楽しいのかぜひ教えていただけると嬉しいわ。
うん。僕のおフルで少し挑戦してみて馴染めそうだったら新しいカメラを買う方がいいんじゃないかな。
ありがとう。次に来てくださるときはぜひ私の写真の批評をお願いするわね。
うん。どんな写真か楽しみだな。
きっと二郎さんみたいにはいかないわ。本当に初めてですもの。
While she keeps her cool and smiles, all I can do is blush and scratch my head. Oh dear, am I being conceited? I can't help but think that Takano likes being with me. It's to me a flattery. I don't think she'd come along this far. No. Taking one's flattery seriously is a mistake I always make. I shouldn't assume that she's attracted to me.
そういえばこうして二郎さんと二人きりでゆっくりおしゃべりをするのは初めてね。
Wink wink.
そうだね。いつも所長とか他の研究員の人とかがいたりするからね。
私 あなたのことを全然知らないの。あなたが東京でどんな仕事をしているかとか、今までどんなことをしてきたのかとか、自衛隊ではどんな活躍をされているのかしら。
昔ちょっとだけ教官の真似事をしてたけどね。怪我をした時に目をやっちゃってね。普段の生活には支障はないんだけど、大ごとに受け取られちゃって、それ以来は事務屋の仕事ばかりやらされてるんだよ。
Takano-san giggles, saying it must have done something silly to cause you injury. Actually, when he says he has a slight fever he has, is he actually just referring to him blushing?
それでね、体内の広報誌を作る仕事を手伝った時に、イベントの写真撮影で初めてカメラの魅力を知ったんだよ。カメラには人を幸せにする力があるのさ。何を言ってるんだろうって思ってるだろうけど、いや、これは本当なのさ。僕はカメラに触れるようになってから日々に幸せを感じるようになったと思ってるよ。
カメラでどうして幸せになれるのかしら。
Yeah, that was a bit weird, but okay.
カメラというのは日々の生活を切り取って写真にして残すものなんだ。残すくらいなんだから幸せなものを写したいというのは当然だろう。じゃあ幸せなものはどこにあるんだろうと、ファインダー越しに自分の周りの世界を覗いてみると、
Okay.
そこには今まで当たり前だと思っていたものが、実はとても幸せなものだったんだと気づくことでいっぱいなんだ。例えば路肩のアスファルトの隙間からけなげに生えている一輪のタンポポだって、忙しく通り過ぎる時にはただの雑草に過ぎないけれど、ファインダー越しに覗いた時、それは春の訪れを教えてくれる季節からの素敵な贈り物であったことに気づけるんだよ。それを写真に収めアルバムに残す。そしてアルバムを再び開くたびに、その時の幸せな気持ちがよみがえってくるんだ。
二郎さんは風景や野鳥の撮影をしながらそんな気持ちに浸っているの？
その写真が芸術的かどうかとか、賞を取れるような劇的瞬間かどうかなんていう野心的なことは僕にとってあまり重要じゃないんだよ。僕たちが気づかない小さな幸せに気づかせてくれる、そこにこそカメラの魅力があるんだと思ってるんだ。だからそんな気持ちでこのひなみ沢をファインダーで覗けることはとても楽しくて幸せなことなんだよ。
So I'm really glad to be able to see Hinazawa through my viewfinder. I feel like this really says a lot about Tomitake's personality. He's fairly optimistic. And somewhat laid back in a way. I have a tendency to go overboard when I talk, but most of the time Takano-san playfully twists my words right back at me. So it's very unusual for her to listen to me like this. Takano-san sat down next to me and tried to fiddle with my camera. I don't know how much of an impression I made, but I think she is indeed interested in cameras. But for the whole ritual, or rituals of Hinazawa side of things, is that why she's interested in cameras? I was expecting her to tease me like usual, so I'm happy to see that this is her reaction.
ちょっと試してみるかい？
私にもできるかしら。
簡単だよ。最初はピントの合わせ方とシャッターの押し方だけ覚えれば十分さ。持ってごらん。ああ、レンズには絶対に触れちゃダメだよ。
ブー、簡単じゃないじゃない。
Since she seemed to show an interest in cameras, I wanted to take a walk around Hinazawa and take some pictures of the scenery. But unfortunately, rain doesn't seem to want to stop. But she was still having fun and kept taking pictures inside the bus stop. Guessing films, photography. I wonder what type of film it's using. So the first set of pictures she ever took were of odd things in that dark little building. That's probably not going to be great photos then if it's in the dark. When it's raining, yeah. Since then, every time we'd meet, we ended up walking around the village with our cameras in our hands. That's cute. Well, it's I'm going about 10 minutes longer than I intended to, but oh well. I guess somewhat doesn't really make up for the day as a chauvinist. In any case, I hope you've enjoyed. Let me know any feedback you have in the comments. And until next time, see ya!